What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Gage. Welcome to the channel. Today, I'm excited to show off my very first One Piece TCG deck profile, and I thought what better way to kick things off than with my very first deck, Zoro. And I'm a huge fan of the manga, and I knew that once the card game came out, I was going to be all over it, and I'm very excited to feature it on the channel and to continue making deck profiles like this. So if you are a fan of TCG content and One Piece in general, then feel free to subscribe for more content like this. And without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and hop right into it. Starting off with the leader of the deck, definitely have to show off the absolutely gorgeous leader. Shout out to Kaizoku Cards. Make some of the best custom leaders and Don in the game right now. And yeah, so as far as Zoro, he is from the very first set of the game. He has 5,000 power and 5 life, and he has a very simple effect where if he has a Don attached to him, this turn all your characters gain 1,000 power. He was a menace when the game first started, and he continues to be a menace even to this day. That buff to all of your characters has just withstood the test of time and is honestly just a really good, solid ability. Zoro is still a menace, and right now I am actually choosing to play the Straw Hat variant, so I'm going to go ahead and show off what that build looks like and how exactly we can best take advantage of using Zoro's ability. To start off the profile, of course, we have to start with 4 copies of the Searcher of the deck, which is Nami, a 1-cost 2,000 power that simply, on play, lets you look at the top 5 cards of your deck and add a Straw Hat type card to your hand. That could be characters, and that can be events. Nami is just very solid, and if you are playing the Straw Hat version, having consistency in the deck is always going to be powerful. And of course, the alternate art that came in the 3 Captains structure deck is also just very beautiful. So of course, I had to grab those for myself. 4 copies of Nami. If you're playing the Straw Hat build, it is mandatory. Continuing with the Straw Hats, I am playing 4 copies of Chopper. Now, some people might say that this is excessive, but in my opinion, when you are playing an aggro-based deck, you really do want to have cards that can be used defensively and have additional options to prevent your opponent from just getting free attacks at you. Of course, the name of the game is that you're really aggressive and that you want to rush and try to take out your opponent as much as possible, but I always love having a little bit of extra assurance, and Chopper is the card to help me do so. Just being able to deny my opponent of a really large swing or forcing my opponent to use their removal on cards like Chopper, which may not necessarily be the most ideal play for them to make. So no matter what, Chopper is always going to force something out of your opponent, and that is why I choose to play him at 4 copies. I am also playing Curly Dedan, which searches 1-cost characters, so he is among the best targets that you want to grab off of the Curly Dedan's effect. So 4 copies of Chopper. I am also playing 4 copies of Otama. It is a 1-cost 0-power character, which is fine because you're really using it as the 2K counter, which is really good at being able to generically stop some of your opponent's weaker attacks. But even more importantly, it has a very powerful on play to give one of your opponent's characters minus 2,000 power during the turn. That is just very good for softening up some of your opponent's attackers, making it so that your leader or even one of your own attackers can take them out that much more easily. But even more importantly, it puts you in a good range for Jet Pistol, which allows you to KO something that has 6,000 power or less. So by pairing it up with the Otama, it makes it so that you are that much more likely to take out your opponent's big threats. Otama is a staple in the deck, It is a 1 costs, which means, again, it is a card that is searchable off of the Curly Dedan, and that is why you kind of have to play 4 copies. I am also playing other 1 cost characters for the Curly Dedan that I mentioned. I am playing 1 Sunny-kun, 2 Sanji, and 1 Makino. The Sunny-kun and the Sanjis are essentially the same in that they are the same cost, the same power, and they are also 1000 counters. They are going to be easily buffed by the Zoro, making them very cheap attackers because as long as you have a Don on Zoro, they are guaranteed to be at 4000 power, which is just great value for a card that is just 1 cost. And then the Makino has the ability where you can rest her. Up to 1 of your red characters with a cost of 1 gains 3000 power this turn. So this really has the ability to make even some of your weakest characters some of the most threatening on the board. I want to be able to play more copies because she is a 2000 counter, and I'm still continuing to play around with the ratios, but right now, this is the number that I have settled on for now. And as I mentioned earlier, we are playing 2 copies of Curly Dedan. Consistency in most card games is key, and Curly Dedan is just one of the best consistency boosters that this deck has to offer. On play, you can look at the top 5 cards from the top of the deck, reveal a red character with a cost of 1, and add it to your hand. So all of those 1-cost characters that I just showed you, including the Nami, so you can use your searcher to get into another searcher, it's just too good to pass up, and so that's why I play 4 copies. For other 2-cost characters, I'm also playing 4 copies of Brook. He is a 2-cost 3000 attack character with a 2000 counter, and on play he can give 2 rested Don to your leader or one of your characters. Most of the time you really just kind of want to hold him in your hand as a 2000 counter. However, his ability does come up from time to time if you really want to try and get even more power into your leader or one of your characters. So buffing is really the name of this deck. Because you really want to get as much power on the field as an aggro-based strategy, and Brook is another card that helps to buff you. I am also playing 4 copies of Sanji. My boy, he is a 2-cost 3000 power, and he is a 2000 counter, and once per turn, he can add a card from your life to your hand, and he gains 2000 power during the turn, and then you can give this character up to 2 rested Don cards. Most of the time, you are just going to be using him as a 2000 power. However, he does have some utility in that if your opponent is choosing to starve you out of cards, meaning that they are not attacking into your life, and therefore those cards are not going into your hand to give you access to fresh resources, sometimes it might actually be useful to go into the Sanji just to be able to get that instant +1. Yes, you are losing out on a life, but if that potential card that you draw into just so happens to be a searcher that can help to get your plays rolling, then honestly, Sanji can be really clutch in those moments where you really may not have had a play otherwise. And that's why I still like playing him at 4 copies. I do see a lot of builds that play less copies or try to cut him entirely, but he's just my boy, and I have to represent Sanji in the deck. I am also playing 4 copies of Roronoa Zoro. He is the namesake of the deck. He is a 3-cost 5000 power with rush, meaning that he can attack as soon as he hits the field. Yeah, you have to play it. It's an aggro-based deck, and having access to a searchable rush target that is able to either hit the field and start taking out some of your opponent's threats, or even hitting the field and going for game is just one of the reasons that this deck is as scary as it is, and why it continues to be the threat that it is. Even all the way up until the newest set, which is OP06. And yeah, he is just, the alternate art is also super badass as well. And I can't see the deck being able to function without playing 4 copies of Zoro. I have seen some builds in which maybe they try to cut to 1, but if you're playing a Zoro deck, you have to play 4 copies of him. I am also playing 4 copies of the man himself, Monkey D. Luffy. It is the Straw Hat deck, so of course you have to have the captain himself, and boy is he a powerful card. For 5 cost 6,000 power, he has Rush, and of course, when 2 Don is put onto him, when attacking, your opponent cannot activate any blocker effects. This is really the top end that you are trying to focus on getting to as soon as possible, because the only way that your opponent is going to be able to stop some of your big swings is by hopefully establishing some blockers on the field, and Luffy essentially just makes it so that none of that matters, and you are extraordinarily threatening and have to make it so that your opponent either has a lot of counter power in their hand, or they're going to lose one of their key resources, or just straight up lose the game. The amount of times that I have been able to Luffy for game has just been too many to count, and that is why I do play the captain at 4 copies. And I am also playing 4 copies of the 6-drop Sanji. Now, I have considered what to play on the top end of the deck for a very long time, and I ended up settling on this not just because I have a bias to Sanji, which of course I do, but I honestly think he is really solid. He is a 6 cost, 6,000 power with 1,000 counter, with the on-play effect that if your opponent has a character with 5,000 or more power, he gains Rush. So in the late game, by the time that you have the ability to start getting into your Sanji, most of the time, your opponent is going to have something with more than 5,000 power on the field, meaning that essentially he is almost always going to have Rush in the late game. That is incredibly important in a Rush deck in which you want to just kill your opponent as fast as possible. There are, of course, other cards that can be considered. There are Shanks, there is the 10 cost Luffy, but I like Sanji because, of course, he's my man, but worst case, he could just be used as a 1,000 counter, and he is searchable off of the Nami. So that's why, ultimately, I ended up settling on 4 copies of him. And honestly, I've really enjoyed it, and I would encourage other people to attempt to try 4 copies of him as well. And now, that is it for the actual character cards. For the events that I am running 4 copies of Jet Pistol. Sometimes I don't want to have to worry about my opponent's threats. I don't want to have to think. I could just say, all right, I'm going to throw down a Jet Pistol, just get rid of whatever threat that might be on the field, and then continue on with my day. As I mentioned earlier, if you use Otama to minus 2,000 to something, that means now you are able to kill something with 8,000 power, which is insane. And of course, if you have the double Otama, that means you're pretty much just killing anything on the board. It is also just really good because of the fact that it has the trigger to then also kill something on your opponent's field, which they might not necessarily have been accounting for. I am a big fan of just having security bombs or cards in the life where if your opponent attacks into it, it allows to swing the game in your favor, and Jet Pistol is just one of the best cards at being able to do so. I am also playing 3 copies of Radical Beam. This is a 1-cost counter that says your leader or character gains 2,000 power during the battle, but if you have 2 or less life cards, it gains an additional 2,000 power. This is just an absolutely broken event because most of the time you could just hold on to this to when it starts to get to the late game, and it means that you just have a 1-cost 4,000 counter for free, essentially. So this is very powerful at just being able to make it so that your opponent can't just freely swing into your characters or freely swing into your life. They always have to keep in mind that if you have a single Dawn up, it could mean that you have a Radical Beam in your hand. It also has a pretty nice trigger where it can give your leader or character cards 1,000 power during the turn, meaning that sometimes it can completely screw your opponent's math in terms of trying to go for game and things of that nature. So I would recommend playing 3 copies. I have tried it at 4. Honestly, I flip-flop between the two, but I am also playing another counter with Guard Point, which is a 1 cost counter that says your leader or character gains plus 3,000. This one is more consistent in that, yes, it's less than what the max of Radical Beam can provide you, but it does not have the restriction to where you have to be at 2 or less life. So I do like the flexibility where I can choose to use the guard point early game if I want. And it means that if I do have a Dawn up, sometimes it might not always be the Radical Beam. It could be the guard point, and your opponent might not be able to properly assess which one it might be. And that 1,000 power difference can actually make the game. There are too many instances in just 1,000 causes the game to be over. So I like playing 3 copies of Guard Point. And guys, that is going to be it for the profile. Thank you so much for sticking around all the way up until this point. Let me know, are you interested in the One Piece card game? If you are, do you plan on playing? Do you have any decks? And are you interested in seeing other types of profiles? I have plenty of other decks, but if there are specific ones that you want me to highlight, I'd be happy to go over it. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time,